Hello fellow gamers and welcome back. I'm as always Captain Sedaris.
And I'm 7Zetter.
Joining us today is Schism Navigator, the community lead of Ashes of the Singularity.
Hello.
Before I start with the main topic, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Henry, though I go online by Schism Navigator. I've been with Stardock for about 3 years now. I started just as a fan and did a bunch of stuff running games and stuff on Discord and things. I got the attention of the CEO, Brad, and I've kind of been involved with more or less all of the Stardock games, including Ashes Singularity ever since. I am a long-time PC gamer. I'm certainly a huge fan of pretty much every strategy game under the sun, especially RTS games. I think my first strategy game, or first RTS game, was the original Command & Conquer way back in the mid-90s.
Today, as you suspect, we have a look at the RTS title Ashes of the Singularity from the year 2016. Finally, I don't have to report any problems on modern systems or that the master servers are offline. Different to other RTS games, here are two factions fighting not in small battles with only 20 to 100 units. No. Here we have thousands of units on massive maps. The game has, of course, a campaign, nothing too complex. The post-human coalition and a collection of rogue AIs being called the Substrate. They fight each other for around 50 to 20 hours. That way you will learn the core mechanics of the game, but the real focus is of course the multiplayer side of the game. This is where the community Discord comes in place. There you can always find the latest news about the game and events. Maybe our guest could tell us a little bit about the Discord and the community. What do you do there?
Sure. Our Discord is one of the oldest, I think, when it comes to a game Discord in general, and actually. I was one of the early adopters of Discord back when it was more for gamers only, and even before Naito, before all the stuff they started doing. And basically, it very quickly became the one-stop shop for people wanting to find each other and play games of Ashes. Since then, it became an official Discord server. Since then, I got a job working for Stardock, and we've done several things on that server, including testing upcoming DLCs, using NDA stuff with people who were testing the stuff before it's officially released in the wild. We also have tournaments. We did actually have a tournament for this year, but because of this year being kind of crazy, that ended up getting scuppered. But we'll do that. We'll do another tournament sometime next year, hopefully. Right now, we're actually doing a private testing with select expert players working on a new total rebalancing of the game. So in general, the server is very active, very useful, both for developers and for players. And it's overall, I'm pretty proud of the community we have on there. It's not the most active or the biggest in the world, but it's very friendly, very helpful, and people love to play games together.
This is always an aspect I really liked about Stardock, the developer of the game, that they are in close relationship to the community. When they released Sins of a Solar Empire, another game they made, they also had a close connection on the forum to the community, to the modders, and they really helped. They listened to the problems, they gave tips and tricks. It was amazing. It's really nice.
Yeah, as much as I would take credit for that, I can't. Like this is something which is deep in the roots of the history of Stardock, of course. I'm just the latest in a long line of people helping to build on that. Brad, who is the CEO and the effectively so as far as I know, sole owner of the company, is a game at heart. Like, the truth is that most people who are at Stardock, we make games because we want to. The software stuff tends to be frank, that makes a lot of money, but games, that's something which Brad and Derek and Carrie and all the guys at the studio want to make because we love games. And because of that, we also very regularly hire people from the community. I myself being one example of the hire. Also, we had, you may know of General's Gentleman. He was hired to be a designer on Ashes as well as on Star Control and Siege as well.
Well, we're already in the history segment.
Yep, and I'm putting it ahead.
Nothing wrong with that. We're talking about Ashes of the Singularity here, but there's a small difference here. There's Ashes of the Singularity and Ashes of the Singularity Escalation. I started with Escalation. Can you say a little bit about this, so to say, past of the game? What's the difference between the two? How did it change?
Well, I guess there's 2 or 3 stories behind this. I'll focus on just 2 though. The first is, of course, the kind of history development. So basically, Ashes wasn't made solely by Stardock. It was made a combination of Oxide and Stardock. Oxide being a company which was founded in part by Brad as well as some guys who used to work with Microsoft on DirectX stuff. And the initial idea of that was basically to create the next generation game, graphics engines and stuff. This is back before people really knew what DirectX 12 was and Vulkan and stuff. Basically, these guys helped to actually make that in the first place. Like, we went and, well, not me personally, but the guys back there went and begged Microsoft to help make this API, etc. And so the first version of the game, people know as Ashes Singularity, was built mainly around that. But then later, Stardock, we wanted to make, kind of the next version of this, 1.5 if you like. And this is what became known as Escalation. Escalation, similar to what we did with Sins of Sword of Empire, was made as kind of a standalone expansion. We then thought, well, we don't want people split between the old version and Escalation. So we basically went and said, okay, everyone who ever bought Ashes Singularity, regardless of how much you paid for it, you automatically get Escalation. Then we basically stopped selling the original version of the game, 1.0. People who own it still have the original version they can play if they want to, but Escalation is kind of, as far as we're concerned, that is Ashes Singularity. So that's kind of the history of that. The second story being the differences mechanically, of course. So there were a couple key things we wanted to do with Escalation. The biggest, I think, by far, was adding the strategic zoom. So again, with the first version of the game, it was all set focus on the actual units and making sure everything looked pretty, etc. But for Escalation, it's more like, hang on a second, we want to add more complexity, but we also need to make sure the players can, see stuff properly and get a handle of things without being overwhelmed. And so, taking inspiration, of course, from other games before, most notably Supreme Commander, we added a really fancy-like texture layer to the game whereby you could zoom out and see the map in this strategic zoom. Those were other things we did as well. If memory serves, one of the big ones as well was just adding the tier 3 units and kind of given the groundwork for adding more complexity, new defenses, all this stuff, whilst also adding some new story-driven campaigns as well, updating everything. Because again, the original version of the game didn't really even have much voice acting in. With Escalation, we updated not just the old campaigns, but added new ones, all of them fully voiced, and yeah, it basically a complete package for anyone who loves single-player games.
It's amazing that you did this in only 6 months after the release. For such a big update or expansion pack in that case, I would have thought at least you need 1 year.
There was a lot of momentum. Some of the key things weren't too difficult to add. I think the biggest element there was once we got the voice actors in for doing the campaign stuff, which is the all-in-one block, and then we had that all ready for release effectively. We also did do updates. Some of this was updates in the base game as well, including adding new voice acting stuff. But when we got to Escalation, we just basically rolled everything together and released it as this standalone expansion. Everyone gets it, and that's the new 1.5 of the game, effectively.
What I find interesting here is, as someone who has played Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander, you can clearly see that the core idea of the game is derived from that. And so there is the technical aspect, like, well, there was DirectX 12 somewhere, and it's a new engine, and it pushes the limits a little further. And there is the story side of it, and even the story, if you play the campaign, seems to be tied in a similar way to Total Annihilation as the game mechanics does. And I'm curious, did you kind of try to make some sort of brother or sequel to the Annihilation franchise, or was it entirely on a different note somehow?
Yeah, no, there's definitely some direct correlation in regards to the kind of style of games. Generally speaking, the way that we usually tell this is that there were 3 kind of direct inspirations mechanically for Ashes. The first, as you rightly pointed out, is Total Annihilation. That also includes Supreme Commander in some ways, because like to us, kind of old school nerds in the sense, that's kind of the entire family. We went Total Annihilation, then went Supreme Commander, and you also have some other games like Planetary Annihilation, which is also a relatively recent game, which is similar style. There's also a few others as well with the Flux economy and that kind of stuff. The second big inspiration mechanically was actually Company of Heroes, I'd say, because we have this zone mechanic stuff going on, and there's a big amount of relic inspiration in that sense, like back in Dawn of War and stuff, where you have the big factor is control of the map, but having specific zones which you take and develop. And the third and last is also some Sins, because we have this mechanic where you form armies, similar to how you form fleets and Sins. And we also have this mechanic where you have NPCs and these kind of like rogue little units you have to clear out to order to capture an area. it's not like a huge problem, but it gives you an added element to like be able to limit how quickly the players can spread across the map. And we also added that as a gameplay feature where the player can tweak if they want that and how strong it is.
Okay, I guess you have basically everything from my list, I would say, when we move on.
I can keep going.
So, what are your pros of the game? Maybe since you are a little bit of the developer side, I go with Saturn first. He's the pro from us both, at least.
That's fair.
Not exactly a pro, but I played it a lot more than you do. I believe Schism already mentioned the groups. Something that always bugged me, for example, in Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander, you have those number groups. You press Control in one and you can group your units this way. But they don't actually behave like a group. They go to a certain place where you send them, but they don't give a damn if the rest already has followed up. And once they are in a group, still they can get split up and stuff like that. And the Ashes approach with the groups is actually something that I was missing in those games. So for me, this is a real big plus here. You can actually manage vast amounts of units, vast armies rather easily. And not just in a military way, but also in an economy way. If you know Ashes and you have played it, you can produce units into a group. And you can, even if you have done the proper things, you can beam your new units into those groups. And this is something I didn't find in other games yet, where you can say, well, I have this group here and I can order my economy. Guys, produce new units and send them to this group. Usually in games you have to do this all by yourself. You produce new units, you may set a rally point and you take the units that are placed there and add them to other groups. Ashes really thinks in groups in this way. You have a group and you can kind of produce into a group, and especially the beam-in mechanics adds in a certain dynamic. At some point you might think, well, I got my opponent's group reduced to only a small number of units, maybe only the Juggernaut or the Dreadnought, and well, he's finished. I just have to get some more units and finish him off. But in the meantime, the guy can produce units into the same position as the Juggernaut or a Dreadnought, and really fast. If the economy is strong enough, you can build up huge amounts of units into this group again, and this can really be a big problem. So it's not just fighting off a already existing group, but also fighting off the economy behind this group, and this adds a new layer to the real-time strategy, I believe. And I find this idea really good, and it actually really eases up management of units. If you think you have, let's say, 5,000 or even 10,000 units on a map, you need mechanics that helps you manage them, and I believe this is something they did terrifically. Then, of course, massive armies in themselves. I mean, Total Annihilation is kind of the father of all this. Having 10,000 units on a map isn't really heard of for many other games, I believe. The classic games are Total Annihilation, Supreme Commander, and maybe even Planetary Annihilation, but usually you have a lot less units, maybe 200 per faction, which leaves you at most games with 8 factions or something like that, below 2,000 units. And this is something you will have easily for one player here. This really is funny, and you really can see how the game somehow derived from, for example, the Supreme Commander. In Supreme Commander you have also vast amounts of units, and here you can really put it to the top. This can be a lot of fun, and you can really see the game was meant to be think bigger. This is something that's always underlined in the Annihilation franchise, and Ashes does it as well, this think bigger, not just some units, not some groups. And especially the implications of that are interesting, because the game doesn't emphasize so much on micromanagement, but more on micromanagement and actual real strategy, not tactics. Many people mix them up, and I believe Ashes is a lot more about actual strategy than about tactics, and this I really love.
I think this is so true that many RTS games lost the S in the word. The strategy is completely missing in most games, but here you need it. You need it if you have up to 10,000 units on a map, especially on such big maps. I was really amazed how big they are.
And you really have to know what you are going to do with them. It's not like, for example, in StarCraft, where you take 2 or 3 Reapers, run over to the other guy and try to mess up his economy. You can play this game probably also in this way, but as you said, there are huge maps where you need at least 2 minutes to get to another player or something like that. So it isn't really feasible to do this in the early game. So you have time to prepare yourself. And in general, the game is a little less fast-paced, and I actually like this. If you don't have to stress about perfectly clicking every position where you want to send your armies. It's okay to point a group into the right direction. It is not important if it is directly to the perfect spot or not. And it is not important if it reaches this position 2 or 3 seconds earlier usually. And I really like that.
Just to add a little insider knowledge about the sheer number of units, I can't remember exactly. I don't think I've ever come across the actual limit, but effectively there is a kind of internal limit to how many units you can have, but it's so high because of the threat neutral nature of the engine that basically no one gets that limit. So effectively, for these purposes, players have unlimited unit caps.
Yeah, I did some testing with this game. I really was thinking, well, let's push my computer to the limits here, and it was a Intel 3770 CPU and a GTX 660 graphics card, and I was thinking, well, let's just do it this way. Let's take an AI opponent, which is easy, so it can take over the entire map, and the idea was simply place one Dreadnought at every region and produce them up to the entire amount that a Dreadnought group can have. And it was, I believe, around about 100 Dreadnoughts or something like that, and they were all full. If you know there are around about 100 units for each group, then you can round it up to, say, 10,000 units, and it worked. It was a little bit sluggish, okay, but it worked. It still worked.
And you can keep making units even outside of armies, so basically your computer will break before the game does.
Yeah. That was my impression as well. The game did go on, but it went on a little slower and more sluggish in that. But it didn't break down like many other games, and you don't have this, I suspect, technical limit that many other games have, where you say, well, you have a supply limit, let's say, of 200 or 500, and you cannot build any more units, not because it is necessary for the gameplay itself, but because the engine will break down. So you put in artificial limits here just to get people not to cross this border.
If you compare it to Supreme Commander, you won't even go near those 10,000 units, and the computer already crashes, or at least it slows down to a slideshow, basically.
Yeah, the especially interesting part here is actually Supreme Commander does use not just one computer core, but it doesn't use all of them. It doesn't spread everything for all CPUs, and Ashes uses all of them properly, I believe. Yeah. And of course, this helps the situation.
I don't need to be said though, because our studio actually worked with gas-powered games back in the day, including on Dungeon Siege, most notably. And what they did with the engine to Supreme Commander is genuinely magic in its own right. But basically, Supreme Commander is the most efficient engine you can get while still having everything do like single thread for like AI and stuff, etc. Whereas with Ashes, we specifically have the engine so it's as neutral as possible for everything. So it can scale to like 12 cores, etc.
Exactly, and this is something you really notice when you're playing it. Simply put, it works. This is what it does. It works. It fits the situation where you, especially in Supreme Commander, if you were building up vast amounts of units, you would notice that it gets slower and slower, up to the point where even the game clock was going slower. So you really notice something is not going the pace it is supposed to do. And this I never noticed with Ashes in this fashion. Yeah, another thing I really like is, well, use a 4K monitor and you can scale your graphical user interface. You can actually pick how big the interface elements should be. You can say, well, let's scale it to 190% or something like that. And I especially like this because there are many games out there which do either one of two things. Either the user interface is always the same size. Like, there are games that always scale it to the very same size so that everybody sees the same part of the map or something like that. And then there are games which use no scaling at all. Let's say the ground control game. If you play it on 4K, you will have tiny little buttons. This really makes the game unplayable on 4K. And, well, in Ashes you can really pick what size you want to have the interface. So the actual game artwork and graphics looks really nice, and still you have a usable interface, and you can even say, I want it in this specific size. This is something I also found very useful and very interesting, because this is, in my opinion, how it should be done. That I can pick how big should a button be. Maybe I have bad eyes and I need them a little bit bigger. Maybe I'm a little better with that and I can have this smaller. It is okay. You can adjust it to your own needs.
I can only add some quality of life features, I would say, like a very good AI, very good path finding, which is rare in RTS. Many maps. Often the RTS games are released with maybe 8 maps, 10 maps. But no, we had 25 or even more maps. It was a big list. And the customization of the match system. You could say, for example, no, I don't want to play with AR units, or I don't want to use victory points. You could so much customize this from every angle of the game aspect. And the biggest, of course, Stardock always keeps their games alive. They reach out to the community and really take care of the whole thing.
And sometimes it's also the smaller things. I mean, if you compare it, for example, with StarCraft, if you get into this game as a novice player, you have no idea what is going on, then you will have no idea what the advantages and disadvantages of every unit are. And in Ashes, it's actually pretty much the same, but there's one really big difference. The game tells you what every unit is supposed to do. And this I find really important, that you can hover with your mouse over the corresponding button of a unit which you want to produce, and it says you what it is supposed to do. You don't have to find out the hard way or read up somewhere online. You know it will be good against frigates, for example, or it is powerful against dreadnoughts, something like that. And this I find really useful because, as we already talked about a little bit earlier, I believe before we did the recording, manuals aren't really in anymore. So reading up on it very often isn't that easy, and you have to Google it and something like that. And here you don't need it. You know what it does.
So now you heard the new version of the pros. Now I would like to hear the mastermind. What are your pros?
Oh, me?
Oh, yes.
I thought we were going to do negatives as well. No negatives then. It's perfect.
No. They will come.
You won't get away that cheaply. No, the bad ones are coming later.
Pros, in my opinion. Well, obviously, I agree with everything you've just said. Obviously, it's amazing. Apart from that, what would add to that? I'd say one of the biggest things is how much it keeps evolving, because a lot of things, a lot of ideas which originally had about balance and the way the game would play and work have altered radically over different versions. Many people today wouldn't really, of course, necessarily get that going into the game like brand new, but it has evolved massively. For example, I still remember way back when it was before like full release, air units were insanely OP. Like effectively, if you didn't have anti-air and a couple like Tech 2 bombers came over the horizon, you were dead. It was like the someone has rushed nukes in the game kind of thing. And that's a more like crude example of that, but like a lot of things have changed in regards to how units work, and keeps changing because of the nature of continual active development. Another huge element to Ashes, I'd say, is the amount of potential in regards to both the setting and also, again, the design of it, because something that was required early on was kind of the idea of, well, we have certain limitations what we can do with the game for like this version. Because, for example, one of the people often asks is like, where's Walker units? Like, this is something which we wanted to have in, but couldn't for various reasons at the time. But because of certain elements, and this is part which I like about the story of it, so effectively, we have, this is going to be into the future of it as well, but the ability to introduce other factions and other units and things down the line. And the nature of both the post-humans and the substrate, and the fact that they are not really human anymore. And basically, all of your units are just like these constructs which are being used. And so we can go like, well, in the future, we can say we get an entirely different list of units out. Whereas, for example, if we're dealing with a setting which is like, say, present day, so you can't really say that, oh, you don't have soldiers anymore, you don't have like these certain tanks or aircraft, etc. Whereas with something like, and this really goes to most sci-fi, but especially because of Ashes, because we're dealing with generals in a sense who are not, really people anymore. they're either, AIs or post-humans that exist within this entire substrate of Tyrannium. We call this Computonium, is another fancy word. Means that we can have the units be whatever we want. And some of this people see now, where we've been adding some new units. So one example is the Phoenix. The Phoenix to me is a hilarious unit because it is a giant juggernaut, which is like it's large, it's imposing, it keeps shooting at things, and it freezes your turrets. But then the cool thing is we can go like, well, you killed it, well done, except now there's an egg. Give it a few seconds, the egg will hatch, and it will come back. And so we're only just starting to get into this right now, development-wise, but one thing I'm really excited about in regards to the potential of the setting is the kind of things that we can do in regards to, like, we want to go crazy. Let's do like some kind of techno tumors or something on the map, or we can do some kind of fancy teleportation tech now because we've already, again, something we've already been experimenting with, but I kind of really love teleportation in RTS because it's funny to me. And so there's a lot of things in the setting wise which I think has a lot of potential that we haven't yet fully tapped, but down the line I'm very excited for. In regards to present day, what currently is in the game, again, certainly the scale, certainly the way the AI works is also pretty cool to me. But there's also an element when it comes to the art design as well, because something which you wanted to highlight as well is the different ideologies at play here. So for the post-humans, you have these very blocky ships. It's very practical. To me, it harkens back to older RTS games like Homeworld, where we had like these colonists that were just kind of like trying to figure out how to do warfare whilst not really being equipped for it. And so the Prometheus, the Hyperion and stuff, they're big, bulky kind of things. They rely on armor and dishing out heavy firepower. But then we have the substrate, which are the AI. They are the like super intelligences which have figured out, we want to do something really unorthodox, really inhuman-like almost. In fact, many times I have people mistake the substrate faction for aliens. They're not aliens. They are actually, originally from Earth. They are basically descendants of the this original AI, Haley. But because they are so inhuman, because they are machines, they think in machine ways. And so the art design for those units have gone through many variations, but have had the same kind of element of like smooth curves. They rely upon this fancy, shield technology, etc. And one thing which I don't think we really explain much in the game, but one thing I have to remind players of, because it's really funny to me, cool, is that with PhD units, you have this dichotomy of like, oh hey, they have this armor, you have to like build medics to repair the armor. But then for substrate, they have shields and energy. But here's the thing, they, even without like these external units you can get which boost that, they will still regenerate faster in their own territory. And so this goes into like a whole thing in regards to both the visual design, the story design, and also the gameplay, because substrate units, substrate players are better suited when it comes to ground warfare to do ambush tactics like go in, strike deep, then come back and recuperate. Whereas the PHC are more like this wall of units that keep advancing. Even as they die, they get replaced and they repair and they keep advancing. This wall of like metal.
Yeah, was thinking about this actually today, that there is somehow a difference because PhDC is more a offensive, really going in, wrecking things, causing havoc, while on the other hand you have Substrate, which are, at least from what I know, are good at defense in their own territory. As you said, they can just get back and the health increases faster there. And as far as I know, the defensive turrets are also a little bit more powerful here. There you have those two qualities which null each other out somehow. So there's really a difference if you have a PHC player versus PHC player, or Substrate versus Substrate, and even in combination Substrate versus PHC, it's entirely different match ideas behind it, I believe.
Yeah, so this goes back to the asymmetry gameplay, and like there's a lot of RTS games which do asymmetry, but I feel like in Ashes we have a measure of subtlety in how we do the asymmetry, which you don't get in other games. Like in your StarCraft, your Greek etc., the asymmetry is a lot more like in your face, and like these things are totally different. But then with Ashes, like on the surface, people see it's like, oh, it's the same kind of stuff. We built this factory, we have this like a nexus, we start building resource points, yeah, I get it. But then for the deeper players, the more you play, the more you'll realize that there are fundamental differences, both overall in the armies as well as specific units, and how you can employ them in a different kind of elemental strategy. And we get people who are very committed to playing one particular faction or another. And I don't think many RTSs really have the combination of asymmetry with subtlety, and then with the possibility of like keep advancing that with the way that the setting is set up. One thing which we'll get into this of course, one thing I'm very excited about is introducing a third faction, which we've teased so many times. And there's so many things that I want us to do with them, but we haven't yet done something, but we will. Apart from that, another element as well for Ashes is that, again, this is talking more about the bigger picture of it, but one of the things I love about it is that it is a very firm kind of testing bed for what we do in the future as well, both, again, story-wise and tech-wise, because, for example, Supreme Commander, people often compare Supreme Commander, and understandably why, but Supreme Commander, the engine that was made for that wasn't the first game made with that engine. The first game made with that engine was Dungeon Siege 1 and 2, and of course we also worked with those guys on Demigod back in the day. But Supreme Commander was like the culmination of that investment. And so similar with Ashes Singularity, like this is like the first generation of this engine. Second generation came with Star Control. We have a third generation now. I can't talk about the game for that, but that is being worked on. And when we get to the sequel, like that means that we'll be up to like the fourth or fifth generation of the engine, and we'll get into that. But like, I'm very excited to see what we can do with that, because a lot of the things with Ashes was like proving that we can do this and making the foundation for what we want to do in the future as well. Another element to that as well is the ballistic model. So this is something that some games, you know it when you see it, because some games do just RNG, like, okay, unit A attack unit B, and you roll the dice kind of behind the scenes, so does it hit it or not, according to the stats? It does or doesn't. Whereas with Ashes, every time a unit fires something, it's a physical object in the engine. Not every RTS does this. Like a few do, for example, original Homeworld game did this back in the day, but Ashes does this whereby, and you'll see this subtly sometimes when it comes like terrain. So like when units are stationed above other units on terrain and they're firing on them, that's not just simply like a stat advantage. It's not just that they can see the units. The projectiles themselves, like artillery or cannon fire, whatever it is, particle beams, etc., it will actually traverse over that terrain much better. Whereas if you're down below, you know, Anakin, I have the high ground, and you're trying to fire at Obi-Wan Kenobi, your projectiles may hit the terrain because it's in the way, because you've not got a clear shot.
Yeah, that's much like in Total Annihilation, where you had the same problem. Terrain actually influences the battle.
And TA also did like go back like the old school stuff, and not many RTS games do that, but in Ashes we do that, and like there's elements of simulation and things with that which are cool, which people don't necessarily notice, but it's there.
But it's mind-blowing that it's on that scale, that you have 10,000 units maybe, and they still fire correctly the weapons.
The artillery, for example, you have a rain of a lot of small objects here. It's not like one big bullet that is coming down, but there are a lot of them. So this already adds on top. You have one unit which, don't know, pushes out 30 or 50 smaller objects. Then you get an idea what is going on with the engine.
And now I'm going to really blow your mind, because there's actually this old RTS game that I love called Perimeter, which had like a full like system so you can change the terrain. You can literally terraform things and use the terrain as a weapon. Anyway, that's an old game. But here's the thing. In Ashes, again, this is something which we haven't really done much with the gameplay-wise, but in the future we can, and I'm excited for what we can do with the sequel, because if you notice, when you place a structure down in Ashes, the terrain itself will deform slightly to benefit that structure. That's because our terrain in Ashes is fully deformable in real time. We just don't do anything yet with it mechanically. But in the future, we can do stuff like, hey, you want to build a wall? Build a literal wall using the terrain.
Yeah, this is something that was already explored, I believe, in Balanced Annihilation. If you, for example, lose your commander and it blows up like a nuke, then you will leave a crater. And this actually is a problem if you try to build a new building, for example, on top. If the walls are too steep, you cannot build there. Ideas like that I really love, because they add dynamic.
Yeah. A lot of things with regards to like scale, etc., are very obvious about Ashes that people love, but there's a lot of, and even the music, for example, we have composer of the Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined Battlestar Galactica. He actually did the main theme for Ashes as well, Richard Gibbs. And there's a lot of things which are like under the hood with Ashes that people don't realize are there, but are there. And it's like foundational stuff for what we can do in the future as well, which I'm very excited about. But we can talk a bit more about that and lore stuff later as well. But it really excites me that people, unfortunately, don't necessarily are aware of it as much as I think they should be. But down the line, I hope to make people more aware of it and kind of what we can start doing with it as well. But hopefully without breaking gameplay, because that's always consideration. Like because with Ashes, we have a more traditional gameplay feature set, in part to make sure people aren't like, too confused. But yeah, I think that's most stuff I want to talk about pros, which has already been mentioned, of course, in regards to the. Well, actually, I will say one more thing. And that's the community. The community with Ashes is, in my opinion, really good. Like, I mean, I can't take credit because genuinely, like, there's a lot of communities out there for RTS games, but some of them get a bit elitist, in my opinion. Some very elitist. But the Ashes community has always been very friendly. And people who are willing to, try a new game or go and like play different games, etc. We do have people who, even just recently, have been coming like from Ashes to Sins to like play games there. Like, hey, they're not the kind of people who, to me in general, are likely to be like very snobbish about what kind of games they play. Because unfortunately, there is some of that with some RTS games where people will only play one game, and I don't think that's really very healthy for community.
Well, and I believe your work also adds here. I mean, you are doing those community events every now and then, and as the captain pointed out, that really helps the community. If it's not just players organizing themselves, doing, let's say, playing every Friday or something like that, but you actually actively try to get the people together and play. And I believe this is a good strategy to keep a game alive and makes the community feel a little bit better than in many other cases where you have people playing this game for quite some time. But as you pointed out, if people are, so to say, informal community leaders, some of them tend to get a little bit elite-like. And so I believe your work also is the reason for this, at least in part.
Well, again, I don't take credit though, because genuinely, like something which I've generally been impressed by across the board with Stardock is the communities we have, and they didn't start under me, kind of stuff. I genuinely feel I don't want to say honored, but like I kind of feel privileged to have a community which is generally very very relaxed, very chill, compared to some I have seen which can get pretty vicious sometimes, unfortunately. And like RTS is a very small genre, really, so it's kind of niche. So I want all RTS games to do well. I want all people to enjoy these games. Like, it's not like a zero-sum game to me, but people can be a bit like, I only play this game. Like, no, play the games as well. Like, enjoy stuff. You never know what you'll like. Except, of course, people who play Dawn of War 3, I mean, I don't know what's wrong with you. I say that because one of our designers on Ashes, in fact, kind of, well, they don't hate it, but they don't, like, love it, but, like, they kind of play Dawn of War 3 a lot, and I kind of make fun of them for it. But that's just me.
But it's a good advice. Play everything and not only one game.
Even Dawn of War 3, play at least once. I have.
And then deinstall it, maybe.
I can't say that again. I like guys at Relic. They're really cool. Made many games I love. Anyway, hopefully Age of Empires 4 is good. I'm looking forward to that. Are we going to move on to the negatives now? I'm ready for it.
Yeah. Since you're so ready, go ahead.
Oh, isn't
no
starting again, or is it me?
I have no problem, but you seem to be kind of keen on it.
Honestly, I think a lot of the negatives for Ashes to me are just things that we wanted to do but couldn't do. Part of the problem for the first version of the game is the fact that it was made by 2 studios, and like Oxide had their own particular focus, and they wanted to make it graphically really efficient, optimized, which it is, and that's part of the reason why it's awesome because it's a huge scale. But they weren't necessarily as focused on some of the gameplay stuff, and especially the early version of the game suffered for that. I think one thing people don't realize is that the campaign, like originally the idea for the story for the game, like the background was made, but one of the ideas was we were going to do this metaverse thing where we'd have like this dynamic like campaign stuff, not really story driven, more like just like this kind of more gamified thing. But that fell through, and so at last minute almost was the campaign. And so that's part of the reason why that campaign in the very first version of the game didn't have much voice acting. So a lot of that had to be like retroactively put into the game. There were also issues in regards to, again, stuff like the budgeting as well to a degree, because so much of the money and focus was going to the engine and stuff. And honestly, our budget wasn't as high as like people compare Supreme Commander, but that game had a much higher budget even for its day. And for Ashes, it wasn't very high, so we had to make a lot of, or the guys at the time to make a lot of key decisions with regards to what we're going to do for the game. Stuff which we wanted to do but couldn't, and add in like it's a lot of expensive art assets and stuff. We're able to add some stuff we want to do later on, of course, most notably getting the Juggernaut stuff in. We also have plans for air transport units, have them fully automated. That's something which was also tied to engineering, as well as ocean stuff like navies. We're still going to do these someday in the sequel, but it's stuff which probably we said we wanted to do, but we couldn't for, business and like practical reasons, which to me is still like frustrating still, because like I really internally like this as much as the fans. I keep pushing for like, can we put resources on the game and make etc. But then the other element as well to that. So at this stage, basically, to do all the things we want to do with the game, we need to basically do the sequel in the new engine, updated engine. So there's still things that we can add to Escalation, but like we're kind of the limit of how much we can just cram to the game without breaking the engine because of the way that it works currently. And it's just, there's not much value in like keep like getting art assets and stuff for things which may just break the engine. So we're doing like a rework of stuff and hopefully add more features as well. Like every now and again we can put someone on it, but we kind of came to a limit to how much stuff we can do with the current version of the game effectively, which to me is frustrating. But then it is what it is, and it's something which has to be for the sequel. Another negative I think tied to that is the fact that because of the nature of trying to make this like crisis of RTS games, basically, many people on launch couldn't run the game or could barely run it. I still remember trying to run it on a GTX 660, in fact, back in the day, and yeah, it barely ran. The fact is that a lot of people kind of, to this day, make fun of Ashes, like, Ashes of the benchmark kind of thing. It's like, and that's annoying because we have massively improved the game since then, and of course people's computers are much faster now and can run it better. But there's still this kind of perception of that, which unfortunately the game is not really going to get rid of, I think, because just the nature of how things happened when it launched. There's also, again, stuff which I've previously mentioned about, like things which are in the game there, but we haven't yet made use of because of different things. So I want to do, but we haven't yet, and we really can't do until a sequel at this point. When it comes to the overall gameplay design, there are things which I would want to do better. The big one for me, I think, is the fact that we have the Nexus. One thing which we'll get into this well later, but one thing which we want to do in the future with the sequel is basically do like a full like commander setup. But currently in the game, we have the Nexus. I've made arguments in the past to try and see if we can add something whereby you can't get away with an Nexus snipe. And we have added stuff. For example, it wasn't the original version of the game, but right now you can upgrade the defenses of your Nexus so it's tougher, so it doesn't get easy sniped late game. But one of the issues there still for me is that you know where the enemy is because you know where the headquarters is. You can't move it, you can't change it. It's not like an MCV in Command & Conquer or Commanders in Supreme Commander or Mothership in Humble or something. You can't move it, you can't change where it is, you can't rebuild somewhere. There's some limitations with regards to the current design which kind of fixate where your enemy is and I think kind of limit options. Even in StarCraft, like ultimately you can move your base, especially if you're Terran, but although maybe not the best of choices depending on kind of game you're playing. But yeah, there's looking things like that which are not like huge negatives, but are things which to me are frustrating from a gameplay design perspective and I wish we could fix. Another one as well that people often ask about is bubble shields and that kind of thing. I'm of mixed minds about this because I actually think the bubble shields are kind of a trap gameplay-wise, but ideally we'd want to do something whereby we could do better fortifications. We had a big push for Escalation as well with adding new turrets and be able to upgrade them, etc. But it's still limited in how effective they are for people because armies still ultimately are better than turrets in most cases. Apart from that, there's a lot of like small things again, like for example, the fact that we haven't currently got support for being able to do like armies for the aircraft. So there's a lot of macro management required for those, which can be annoying for players sometimes.
Yeah,
also, like,
I second that.
Also, like small things which like stuff which we had for some things but not others. Like for example, you can ask an AI ally to give you a node, but you can't like transfer a node between two actual like players playing. Small things which like again the sequel will fix. Like basically imagine all the diplomacy stuff in Singularity Empire, we'll just do that in Ashes. So you can like do like, oh, I want to share vision, I want to share resources, no I don't because I don't trust them entirely kind of thing. A lot of ways we can do like fun politics in an RTS aka backstabbing. Again, there's lots of things which, like, we know are issues, but we just never had the time and resources to fix it. Like, it's always triaging things. For example, the replays just don't work, honestly. They just don't really work as they should. Whenever we've had engineers do stuff, like, there's been project like, hey, forget the replays, can we make the UI better? Can we add this, etc.? Like, nothing which I campaign for is, like, being able to, like, similar to Supreme Commander, drag and, like, just make, like, 50 buildings at once. We can't do that currently in Ashes, and that's, again, an engineer thing, which is small things because of the nature of it being a very early, like, version of the engine, but stuff which we can easily change and add with a sequel and the new version engine we have. And the last but not least of those, I think, is modern. Like, I really wish we had, like, huge set of mods for the game, but partly because of the game engine itself, partly because of just not really getting the momentum with the fans, we just haven't had many mods for the game. But I would love to, at some point in the future, have, like, where we have, like, mods of, like, oh, hey, I'm gonna play as Rome attacking Carthage. Sure, like, lots of things you can do potentially with massive scale armies, but currently we don't really have the mods or the mod support for it properly, even though we are very modern for this studio. But there's some limitations with Ashes, which to me, as a community manager, is like, I wish we had mods I could share and, you know, be like, hey, look at this cool thing someone's made. I mentioned previously as well before the chat, but we do have map makers, and the thing which we did for that is basically just like, hey, give us your maps and we'll just put them into the game ourselves. And that's what we did for many maps, which is one of the reasons why there's so many maps for the game. But stuff like that, which, you know, we've, like, been working on with other versions as well. We do have Steam Workshop support, for example, Star Control Origins, which has this different version of the engine, basically. But we can talk more about it later. But yeah, lots of small things with regards to I wish, you know, we could have done and already had done, but couldn't for one reason or another. And, like, yeah. I should probably stop ranting before I lose my job. it's like it's something that fans, I don't necessarily understand all the time, but, like, we want to add these things. We want this to be as awesome as possible, but there's always limitations on time or money.
I believe that is the important part that you already mentioned. People who are willing to do this, who actually are keen on getting a cool game out. This is a very important aspect. It's not just about making money and doing something technically okay, but you want to improve it. And as a software developer myself, I can tell you, yeah, there are a lot of cases where you would think, well, I believe this needs some more polishing. But the product manager says, well, no, we need to have to go out with this. We have to make money with it now. Otherwise, well, we are in trouble.
When fans tell us like, hey, where were those Navy units? We want those navies. Like, we want them too, but we just couldn't get them in for other reasons right now, etc. But, like, we can talk more about, like, future, what we want to do for sequel later. But yeah, that's kind of my list of negatives, I guess, is that the way the game launched gives it a bit of a negative perception, which I don't think is really just justified, and just the way that we've not been able to do things which we want to do, but just haven't had the time and resources.
Well, for me, it's similar. I was never involved in the early part of the game. As I said, I played this for around about half a year, maybe a year, I'm not sure. But I didn't have any connection with all this history, and from someone who hasn't seen this history, which may give the game bad credit somehow, I believe the game overall is rather okay. I mean, it's not a gold standard, but it is actually good. It's not something where you say, well, you would have needed at least a year more development. But I also have a lot of smaller points, so to say. One thing you already mentioned is this mass building of, well, buildings of structures. I mean, the game heavily relies on a massive economy. Massive amounts of units need massive economy, and you can scale up your economy with certain buildings or units. And especially the buildings, the refineries of the PRC, for example, are predestined to be built en masse. A whole lot of them, and right now you have to click every one of them in place. And if you click at a certain position twice, well, it's not bad because the constructor will just overlook this. But if you would just could be dragging it with a rectangle or something like that, that would be cool. You already mentioned that, and many other games of this type actually do this in some way. So this really, I believe, is a lag. This could be improved on. As you said, it's a technicality, actually. It's not something that changes the game entirely. There were discussions that, well, maybe this changes gameplay somehow in a negative way. I don't think so. I've seen other Annihilation type games which only show you, well, the game gets just better playable. It's more fun to play it. You don't have to focus so much on clicking at certain points, but kind of conveying an idea to the game engine. Let's say, well, I want this area full of refineries, for example. And it will do this. And well, it would help the massive scale of the game actually, which I believe the game points at. On top of this, what really bugs me is the bad clicking behavior. I mean, as I said, the game isn't too focused on micromanagement, which I find quite alright, quite okay. And there's still aspects like you can order, for example, a group to take over a certain region. If you click on the energy spot, which actually is the center of the region which you will have to take, and you need some time, and after a time it is yours, you can click there, point your group there, and if it is a blue line, it shows you, well, you are actually ordering the group to take over this spot, not just move there. And similar, you can take a constructor and point it at a certain building which is being built or being upgraded and tell it, well, help with the upgrade or building process. And if you do it the proper way, it gives you again the blue line. But very often you find yourself in a position where it doesn't matter where you click, it will never get blue. It always stays green, which means the unit just moves there and doesn't do the job. And this can drive you nuts. You're clicking onto it, you're clicking around it, nothing happens. And it's sometimes the smaller things that really bug me with the game. And speaking of bugging, I believe Schism already mentioned that too. Ashes has a bad reputation, and I also kind of still know where it is coming from, because someone, I believe, pointed out Ashes equals crashes, and I can totally confirm this. The game isn't 100% rock solid, which is kind of normal for any game, but I had a lot of crashes with the game, and more than with many other games. So I believe some more testing might have given more time to fix those problems, or maybe even discover those problems. And I believe same goes for the replays. Replays are technically problematic, and what really I believe is lacking with the replays, if you understand what a replay is all about, you are about to analyze your gameplay. Some mistakes you made, some processes that went on, or some dynamic situations where you really have to go back and forth and see what happened when and how did it affect your situation later on. In Ashes, you cannot do this. You have to play the entire replay from start to end. You may go faster, but you cannot go back, and you cannot just jump at a certain point. So let's, for example, give your replay to another player, a friend who you want to show something, and you say, well, you will see this at minute 40 or something. You will have to play this replay until minute 40, even if it is at a pace of 8 times the normal speed. It will still be 5 minutes, and you cannot scroll there. It's again one of those smaller things, and as you pointed out, it's a question of time probably. If the tech guys had gotten more time, then they would probably have done something like that. But other things maybe are just, well, up for debate. For example, I believe there are still some balance issues which aren't addressed fully. For example, take the ability to beam in. You can, as I described, produce and beam units directly to a group of other units. And there's an important difference between the PHC and the substrate. While the PHC has the Charon unit, you can give a group simply a Charon unit, and every unit that is produced into this group will be beamed to the position of the Charon. So you need some resources, a little bit of quanta, and you can make basically every group have the ability of beam in. While on the other hand, Substrate only has the ability of nanotransport, which can only be cast on Juggernauts and Dreadnoughts. So it is a prerequisite here. You need at least a Tech 3 unit in this group, and it costs you quanta for the actual process, which is okay. But it gets more expensive, more expensive, more expensive. So after a while, it gets really expensive.
You can cast it on cruisers as well. Tech 2.
Are you sure?
Yeah, you can.
I believe I tried this at some point. Okay, then I will have to recheck this. But still, there's this imbalance of resource cost here, because it gets more expensive with every cast you do it. And the other way around here is the difference between full repair and partial full repair. You know, the substrate, if it's taking damage to the actual chassis, not just to the shields, at some point the shields are gone, you can repair them up again.
You can repair them using the fabricators.
So your construction units can repair them.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that too.
Yeah,
I'll have to try that.
There's more things of that. Basically, they have like if you look at them closely, they have like 2 different types of like beams come out of them. One is like a red one, which is a repair one. That also can apply.
Yeah. I believe that they also mentioned that in the tooltip, if you hover over the production button or the unit. But I was never sure if it actually has an effect.
When it comes to straight though, like 90% of the health is in the shield anyway.
Yeah. That's something I also noticed. Once your shields are gone, you're probably toast.
Yeah, they're pretty much all shield. But yeah, there's a I don't know, small things that frustrate me. Frustrate me so.
Some things are probably just a question of taste. I mean, I believe the environment wants to convey the big scale. If you look at the map, you have things that look like hills, but actually I believe they are meant to be mountains. So really, really high, not just some little bit higher spot. And there are also plants, tree-like formations, and I believe if you compare it with, for example, Supreme Commander, it isn't that easy to notice what the idea behind it is. In Supreme Commander, you could easily spot those kinds of trees which you know on Earth. You simply know, okay, this is the scale of a full-size tree, and the commander is like 3 or 4 times its size, which I believe it makes it easier to see what the actual scale of the game is meant to be.
The dreadnoughts in general are supposed to be over a kilometer long.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see the relative size of, for example, a dreadnought or a juggernaut in comparison with a frigate or a cruiser. But you would never get the idea what this means if it is a kilometer in size. So I believe the idea behind it is there, but it is not depicted in a fashion that you can really spot this. You notice that on your own. The first time when it really struck me was when I took a closer look at the splash screen artwork, where you can really see, well, actually those Nexus buildings are meant to be really massive, and even the amplifiers, if you watch the in-game cinematics, even the amplifiers are actually huge buildings. But you don't get it just from a look of the actual gameplay. And, well, aside from that, I only have one complaint about the AI, I believe. The AI was solid, I believe. It does its job, but it isn't doing it in a tricky way. If you change the level of difficulty, it actually doesn't play dumber or smarter. It just cheats a little more or cheats itself. Getting more more resources, building faster, stuff like that.
Yeah, I can give a little insight to this. The AI is a state machine. It's actually needs to be rewrote, honestly, because Brad is an evil genius who specifically asked players to give me your cheesiest strats. I'll program the AI with them. Did the AI itself doesn't it cheats and it doesn't cheat. So at normal difficulty, it won't cheat at all really. At higher difficulties, it gets it's mainly just economic bonuses, with the insane stuff being truly insane way, breaks stuff it'll start building dreadnoughts in seconds and stuff. But it doesn't have cheats like some other AIs do, where it's not it can't see your units when it.
No, not in this fashion. Yeah, but yeah. I believe you can agree if you have 4 times the amount of resources and only 1/3 of building time, that this is a huge advantage. And if you don't know about this, then you might think, well, the AI is playing really well. No, it simply cheats you.
Yeah, beyond that, it's getting resource bonuses. That's the way that we make it tougher.
Yeah, this is what I'm trying to get at. If you take, for example, the StarCraft AI, it plays differently. It just doesn't play faster or get resources faster. It really reacts differently on things you do. For example, if you go to a medium level, you can still try a cannon rush. If you go on a higher level, the AI will prevent you from doing this. So the AI actually plays smarter.
So I guess now the noob tells you a little bit about the cons of the game. Until today, I never played the single player. I only played multiplayer matches with Saturn. And doing only the multiplayer, well, you're really lost. For example, the naming of the units. They are called frigates and dreadnoughts and cruisers, and I didn't get it because they're on the ground. Why should they have ship names? You get lost by the naming structure of the things, and you get lost by the variety of options you have. You can do so many strategies, so many casts. The concept of the Quanta was lost in the, I would say, first 2 games to me. Saturn had to mention, oh, you have to build also these buildings so you can cast special abilities or improve your units. Things like that, which the game doesn't tell you.
It depends a little bit. If you look at the Quanta aspect, actually the game again tells you what you will have to build in order to get other building, but the importance is not that obvious. I mean, if you have only 5 of those quantum archives, well, it won't get you anywhere.
Yeah, I only built maybe 2 or 3 and thought, yeah, okay, I don't see the increase that much. I should have built, of course, 50 of those, then I would have seen the difference. Also, what I don't like is that the units don't have a formation system or positioning system like in Supreme Commander or in Company of Heroes, where you can position your tanks to the enemy and not your ass to the enemy.
Yeah, this is something I would also have to concur with. The worst part is, if you have ever tried it, if you have a group full with a dreadnought and a lot of units, and you say during a move, stop. You might think, well, they stop. No, they begin to turn around. As you said, they show the enemy their asses, in this case, all the smaller units which are being picked off one by one. This was really something I didn't understand, I didn't get, until I realized, well, every time I do this, when I stop them, they turn around. This was new.
Yeah, I believe this is part of the, because we actually did the Pathin AI as well, and the way the army AI is a bit too independent sometimes. This comes into the idea of, like, how much the game focuses on macro versus micro. In the future, I do want us to do, and I've proposed it several times, having basically a tactics choice with armies, of course, which can better help refine that to a degree. But there's also like an element there of, like, practically speaking, you're not really supposed to micro stuff like that. So it's kind of a combination of both technical things to like tweak and improve, but also there's a choice in design as well.
Then I have to concur, the ground or the environment better isn't that clear. You don't have the proper scale for it, and also the look, I think, could have been a little bit better compared especially to the optic of the units, which looks very amazing.
Maybe on a side note, I don't know how you felt about this. When you play Ashes the first time, you really have a problem distinguishing the units. I mean, this goes for a lot of RTS games, but in Ashes it was particularly difficult for me to distinguish different units just by their looks. Today I know what they do and how certain units look and what I'm facing here, but for a novice player I found it a little bit too similar, each unit to each other.
Also, what I meant in the beginning of the cons, the naming of the unit is confusing sometimes. If you have a unit called, for example, Fast Attack Scout, you have an idea what this unit will do. In this game it's sometimes okay, maybe it's an attack unit, but maybe it's a support unit. Let's try it.
Especially the PHC units where you have those Greek god names.
Yeah. Of course you can read the text, but in a multiplayer game where you have to react fast to certain moments, well, you can't read everything and all the time. And the last thing I have is, as a content creator, you mentioned it, the replay function should be a little bit better. I always hated in Sins of a Solar Empire when I want to record a certain part of the replay and I have to watch the whole thing over and over again. So I have the right angle and the right moment. This I hate.
But maybe a positive aspect about this, I'm not sure if you are aware of this, you can turn the map freely and you can zoom in freely and you can even tilt the map freely.
Yeah.
This is something I didn't know. The tilting aspect wasn't that obvious, but you can turn it, and much like in Supreme Commander when you were low enough and you pressed space. This is something I really found awesomely cool. Almost like in ground control.
So now enough of the negative aspect of the game. What makes this game unique?
Well, of course, the fact that you can really have massive armies. I have never seen any game that gets close to this, and as I said, optically it's not that obvious, but it really tries to convey the vastness, the big size of things. And the more you think about it, and if you compare it with the story that they are telling you, it is actually think big. This is something that Total Annihilation Supreme Commander already did, but I believe Ashes puts it even further and to a new scale. I believe this is similar to Sins of a Solar Empire, for example, where you also have a bigger scale of everything. But to have it really on a unit scale, where you can say, well, I have thousands of units here, and I have a map that is really vast here, and you have a lot of regions and a lot of options. There's a whole lot in it, and I don't know any other game that has this scale. At least this is one important part, of course. And well, I believe maybe I can add one thing here. This game was the first time when I got my computer to shut down, but It was my own fault. I turned the vents a little bit too low. But no other game actually did this before, and this game really uses system resources.
What have you done to me, father?
No, seriously, I was experimenting with a fan control where you can manually adjust the levels, and I was trying to, well, maybe half amount is okay. No, it's not.
Yeah, we have specifically said in the past that people shouldn't overclock when playing Ashes because it uses individual cores and threads like it does. It actually will already make your CPU run hotter than it would normally.
And before you told us you don't have any special memories.
Not sure if this is a special memory about the game messing up with your fans.
Oh yes, it is.
But yeah, it goes into this direction, and yeah, fooling around.
I have to concur, the scaling aspect of the game is, I think, really unique. I don't remember any other games with so many units. Then you have, of course, it's the first game for DirectX 12 and Vulkan. The before mentioned community aspect with all the Stardock games is amazing. I think there is no game out there or no game company out there who really actively communicate with the community and host events. And Zadun, you mentioned it, the UI scaling for 4K. Which other RTS game lets you scale properly the UI?
Planetary Annihilation.
Beside of that,
Sorry, crashing your party. I just found out about this yesterday because I was thinking, well, maybe other games can do this as well, but I'm not sure if there are a lot of them right now.
Well, no one really plays RTS games that are made for 2010, do they? That's the problem.
yeah, the amount of games we have in the last, say, 10 years is not so much. I have also 2 more points. I would say the benchmarking of this game is also unique. You only have a few games out there in the history of gaming who you can really use as a benchmark. Of course, everyone knows Crysis, but Ashes is also another one who is always represented in the gaming forums where they compare the results, which is not a bad thing.
The funny part here is it is even built into the game. There are a lot of games where you can, well, play the game and use this as a benchmark, but here we actually do have a benchmark function inside the game.
Yeah, and the stats are amazing. I can't remember any games with such detailed stats of your benchmark results. And the last thing I have to say is the merger of the main game and the expansion pack was really well done. Not only did they say, okay, you bought the main game, you get the expansion and vice versa, but also when you bought both, you got a 1-year season pass, so you got all the DLCs for free. So what do you think as a developer was unique in this game?
I actually think that the lore behind the game, which a lot of the inspiration behind the setting of Ashes is very hard science fiction. The kind of stuff which people would read in books over seeing like in movies and TV usually, because the very nature of like the posthumans is fascinating. Whichever a scene in the game in one of the campaigns, it kind of helps us demonstrate this. In that, spoiler alert, if anyone's listening, there's a point where you actually end up quote unquote killing one of the posthumans. She's not really truly dead, of course. I mean, basically, like she's just kind of like the main kind of mass of Tunium that actually runs her consciousness is essentially destroyed. But the moment that happens, she ceases to be sapient enough, aware enough, intelligent enough to be in the metaverse, in this kind of digital reality that the posthumans interact in.
This is actually something I have a question to.
Yeah.
You describe it really well, but something I'm still not clear about, is there still some sort of actual human around, or is the entire body transferred away?
This is the thing, because a posthuman in Singularity is not just a single human. It's someone who has transferred their consciousness to essentially computers and has grown to the point where they become super intelligent to when they start to perceive reality on a different level. It's like a post-singularity thing. There are still humans, which are just like normal humans, those who are like cyborgs, augmented, etc. But post-humans is something else. They have a whole different order.
So actually their bodies are somehow gone because they went out into the machine and left the shell behind.
Their reality is these essentially Jupiter brains, because what they're doing is they're actively converting entire planets into computonium or terrenium. They are turning entire worlds into being part of their own intelligence. And this is also why the coalition forms, because some post-humans are jumping the gun and trying to steal as much as possible, whereas they're like, okay, the whole reason the coalition exists is to basically keep humans, because humans are always going to cause trouble, in check. But then, of course, substrate rise up as AI is a kind of an alternative, at this point, species and culture to them, which becomes the war, as it were, and thus the name Ash Singularity, because the entire setting of Ashes is set after the Singularity, after humans and AI have figured out how to cheat death, how to become basically these immortal machines. But then, most humans still left on Earth and not really been, it's like the whole like 1%ers thing, right? So you have like the elitists who kind of gone ahead. Now, some of the characters, like Mac in the story, he wants to elevate all of humanity to make everyone post-human. That would require basically converting the entire galaxy, though, which in itself has arguably some issues there with themes of like just exploitation and like turning the entire galaxy into this, where like, well, what about other life out there? And you have those who are like just in it for themselves, you have those who think they are inherently superior, and of course you have those who are, very concerned about this AI and what they're up to. And we have a book called Dawn of Singularity, which kind of helps set up some of the prequel to this. We have Siege of Centauri, which is a spin-off game, which is actually about the first human colony. So in Siege of Centauri, it's about these humans sent from Mars, which go to colonize, using like a traditional like spaceship. And then they come under attack from something they don't recognize. So there's all kinds of things we've got to set in, which are it's very, very, very hard science fiction and has so much potential future, which I absolutely love. And I think that out of all the RTS games, that there's many RTS games which are sci-fi, but most of them tend to be either soft science fiction or science fantasy, like StarCraft, for instance. StarCraft is like, we have psychic powers and stuff. Like, that's not science, that's just fantasy. It's like Warhammer, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. But Ash is pretty unique in being very hard science fiction. Like, everything in the game, in the setting, is maybe actually possible in reality. Hopefully, in reality, the future isn't war between godlike entities, but who knows?
This is actually something I find interesting. As I said, it doesn't only go scaling up the battlefields and increasing the actual size, but it also improves on a philosophical level. There are two ideas here, as is already pointed out: the singularity, which means the point after which intelligence rises exponentially, because the smarter you get, the more ideas you can get how to improve your smartness, your intelligence. So after you reach this point where it is an exponential function, this is the singularity, but it also draws on the AI aspect, which can go through a rather similar experience, where the AI can improve itself and get smarter and smarter just in the same way, but not derived from a biological point of origin here. And this is something I find interesting, because if you think back at Total Annihilation, at this point, I believe, if I remember this correctly, it was only humans transferring their consciousness into machines and living on forever, because, well, you build just another machine and copy your consciousness down somewhere. But the singularity aspect takes us even to another level here. This is actually what philosophical debate shows. This might actually be happening at some point. And again, the game takes us to a new level, even story-wise.
It's also interesting, in the sense that the setting as well, because usually you'd expect like ships to be involved in like space battles, but something which we are known for at Stardock is doing like space games, because galactic civilizations and of course Sensorial Empire, etc. Like, we like our space battles, and Off-World Trading Company, even to a degree, etc. Even though it's not really space battles, but like corporate warfare on Mars and stuff, I guess. But when it comes to Ashes, it's like total war on the ground. But again, the funny thing about it is because we have a technology called quantum streaming in the setting. So basically, at a distance, these post-humans and substrate AI, they basically, encourage atoms to work together and suddenly build these nanomolecular machines, which then build like, the actual nexus and stuff, and start to convert the planet into a mass of terrenium for them. And so even though they have this warfare going on, they don't really have a space fleet. because they don't use a fleet to get there. They use this quantum streaming technology, like a kind of long distance teleportation almost, and then connect their minds across vast distances. So it's also unique in the sense that the setting itself kind of precludes any kind of space warfare, but it's very much involved with ground warfare, fighting over these planets for the resource of Ptunium.
Again, a question of detail about this. In every mission you have those energy spots which mark a region. And I believe at some point it is mentioned that those are somehow built in advance, so there is still something going on even earlier.
Basically, they started seeding the worlds they could find through quantum streaming, so to slowly convert them. But then the war starts when post-humans start to jump the queue, and the coalition forms, and then the substrate come out, and then they go to full war with each other. That's kind of the law of reason as well. And of course, the neutral thins you see come up, they're based at the original automated guardians of these planets before they were assigned to a post-human or someone. But obviously now they're building much bigger war machines to fight each other.
What I wasn't clear about is how did those machines which are building those bots to the destination planets, are they also quantum teleported, or are they actually spaceships inside? Because many times in the game it says they don't have ships.
So it is quantum streaming. So basically what happens is, way back at the start of the story, like Haley and Matt kind of start to use this technology called quantum streaming. What they do is they kind of reach out to a planet where they can reach it through this technology, and they don't teleport a chunk of stuff. They just encourage individual atoms start to work together. They make nanomachines basically, and then those nanomachines start building up and create structures and stuff, and then they get big enough whereby they can build these nodes start to transmit and connect over vast distances as well, kind of a superluminal communication network. That's how it works. So it's very high level kind of hard science fiction in that sense. But the setting I think is also a lot of potential on the line, because you have the post-humans that are the 1%ers trying to they want to consume the galaxy basically. Some of them are good guys, some of them are not. It depends. You have the substrate, who are the children of Haley, the original AI, who's they have their own destiny in their own minds and want to Haley has complicated reasons why she is now opposing the post-humans of the coalition. We keep this deliberately vague for now. I don't want to say too much. And then we also have the normal humans. In fact, the chief amongst them is Darius of Darius Robotics. Basically, he's a bit like Elon Musk, and he's on Mars. But on Mars, they basically want to he wants humans to still be human, effectively, not become these strange inhuman things. And so he uses robots and stuff all the time, etc., AI. But they have this idea of taking humans and building actual real spaceships and going colonizing places. And this is, of course, much more efficient use of resources, arguably, because you don't need to convert an entire planet for one single post-human, as opposed to you can have billions of humans on a single planet, of course. That is going to be our third faction when we do that. Will be actual, more traditional humans. And then we also have stuff which we hint at in regards to, one of the questions you have to ask is, where are the aliens?
Yeah. I believe this is the interesting part. If you play the campaign, at first they keep it vaguely and say it's of unknown design somehow.
Yeah.
We have never seen this somehow alien. Yeah, I believe they literally say it's alien design or something.
I believe that was in reference to substrate, though, because initially the posthumans don't know what substrate are.
Exactly. This is what I mean. When they're encountering substrate the first time, and they referred to as alien, but as a matter of fact, later it turns out it's their own AI that is kicking their butts here. So, as you pointed out, where are the aliens then?
Where are they? The Fermi's paradox. And in fact, it is hinted at. I don't want to say too much of the stage because that's future, of course, but it's hinted at. Part of the reason Haley does not want the posthumans to just take all the planets and stuff is because it might attract something that they don't want to attract, and maybe they should use resources more wisely, because Fermi's paradox, some great filter. Yeah. There should be other life out here, because you go to these planets and there's actual complex life. There's trees and animals and stuff, and yet there's no other sentient life. There's no other civilization out there. So what's going on?
So it might point a little bit into the direction which Star Trek Picard later took. Maybe someone else was first with inventing an AI, in their case, the AI won.
Yeah, this is something which I think is pretty unique to Ashes, and it has actually a pretty deep and very high-level kind of hard science fiction setting, which not many games in general do, and especially RTS games, because most RTS games tend to be either soft science fiction or kind of just fantasy.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward. I mean, I believe that the last mission says we will see each other again or something like that, and yeah, I'm curious,
Since we already touched the future of the game, what would you say should a sequel have?
Ah, a sequel. My favorite subject. So there's some things I can say with certainty about a sequel, and those mainly rely upon the engine tech we have. So right now we have kind of the third generation of this engine. Some of the key advantages of it. One is that we can stream content in dynamically. So we don't need to load everything up. So we can just keep adding stuff and have it only load into the game when needed. This is huge for a number of reasons. It'll run better on lower spec systems, and it will also not become unstable because it's loading too many things at a time. And we just keep adding stuff, which is great. Second is modern support. So this is a big deal. We have added Lua support to the engine. So basically, if you know Lua, you can make any unit, any kind of asset in the game engine. It's great. On top of that, we also have Steam Workshop support when it comes to we had that with Star Control actually, the engine, and so we have a lot less stuff that built in now where we can actually manage mods in the game engine. We also have a bunch of stuff when it comes to the core engine. We have it working on Linux. We also have some console port stuff going on. I mean, obviously not necessarily would want to play an RTS on Xbox, but we could do that with the sequel. And of course, I've mentioned previously as well, but I'll mention it now as well. General design ideas for the sequel. We want to do a commander unit. We want to do kind of missions during the game and salvaging of things. We want to do 3 factions at the very start. We'll basically redo the post-humans and the substrate entirely. I won't reveal too much about the story at this stage. There's a couple of things we have ideas for that already, but it'll be a lot more kind of asymmetric with 3 factions. One will be the post-humans, one will be substrate, and one will be essentially these humans, these human colonist kind of types from Mars. And because we have Lua support now, it'll be a lot easier both for our people to add and remove things and gameplay stuff, as well as for modders. So you'll be able to add virtually anything you want. Total conversion mods will be a lot easier to make. You can even redo AI and stuff with that, which is really good. It does have some efficiency costs, so it isn't as effective as a benchmark tool as the first game is, but it will be a lot more easy to change things and add and remove things to the game. We also want to do, of course, navies and air transports, all this fun stuff. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to when we can get full production of the sequel. We haven't started yet on it, but we have some ideas, and we have this engine which we're working on another game currently I can't talk about. But basically, when that's done, we'll probably move in onto working Ashes 2 at some point. I'm hoping, I don't want to give a year really, but I'm hoping sooner rather than later, but I can't say when. There's a lot of cool things, tech-wise and design-wise, I want to do with the sequel, and we're in a much better position now because of how mature our tools are.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that.
Maybe we'll even get a Linux port, because Linux fans love it in Linux.
Oh, Saturn will also love it.
Well, if you need a tester for this, I will love it, yeah. At least I can give you a testing ground here.
In the short term, we are currently, we do have a small little thing going on right now with a balanced rework of the game. We have a number of testers helping on that currently. We've been in testing for about 3 weeks now on that. So Ash is not done, but when it comes to adding new features, that will now most likely be a sequel thing. And we haven't started on that yet. But when we do, we'll have a very advanced engine to work on.
So you're more or less in a planning phase.
Yes.
So you don't actually develop anything at the moment, just plan for the future.
For sequel, we haven't started working on sequel yet, but when we do, and we do have it in our list basically of games we're going to make next. We have something big we're working on currently. I can't talk about it, but that includes our next gen engine right now, which is getting very mature. And it'll be really cool to see what we can do with that in other games as well. So, but I can't talk about that too much. But modders will love it. We'll have full modern support. They'll change anything dynamically. It's pretty powerful.
Well, I believe this is also one of the advantages that even Chris Taylor pointed out at Total Annihilation. One of the things that makes this game so powerful, even having it being old. He said, well, you can easily add new units, you can easily mod the game. That helps not just by modding, of course, but also by development. Let's say adding a DLC or something like that. So
a couple of things I can also add is that for the sequel, because it'll be a sequel, we will likely end up having a bigger budget for it, which also means more artists, and we will be doing more walker units. So it won't be like just the same stuff. Like we'll still have hovering gravity channeling units, but we'll also have like for all the factions, we'll have like walking units as well.
Will there also be in cloaking and maybe, strangely, digging?
We'll see. We'll see.
Just two ideas I'm tossing around in my mind, having a unit that isn't visible on any radar which goes through the ground, for example, where you cannot simply put on a defense perimeter because you can just go below it.
Well, you never played Command & Conquer, I guess.
Nope.
There is a tactic against that.
Actually, I would check out Perimeter because that game did that kind of stuff and it was awesome.
Saturn, you want to continue?
Yeah, I believe we're still in the segment doing things better. Of course, the stuff I mentioned earlier. An AI that plays smarter, not cheatier. Something you, I believe, also pointed out, making groups configurable. Something that always pisses me off is when the enemy is nuking you and part of your group simply isn't protected. Why? Well, because the jamming unit is in the rear of your group. If there were a way to configure your groups, let's say keep the medics, the repair unit freely roaming to do their job, but for example having the jammer centered, that would really help in terms of putting out a strategy. Just as a minor thing, but I think it would help.
Also that maybe the scout isn't the first unit who is attacking.
Yeah, this is something I also noticed. I believe we talked about this. When you go into battle, it's very, very likely that your radar unit is getting sniped somehow, which really can annoy you because this is the one unit you will have to rebuild after every encounter. And maybe there's some way to circumvent it, but only if you can configure your group, of course. And well, the clicking problem I already said, this is really something that bugs me. And of course, the replays. And aside from that, I believe it's mostly really improving, not just fixing problems. An idea that I believe also was tossed around in the Discord was a planetary scale. There's planetary annihilation out there. Maybe even the Ashes scale could be translated into this. Just an idea. Or you already said there will be another faction, maybe even a fourth. I don't know. But one I will be totally happy with.
I can't talk about a fourth faction.
All right. And of course, map filtering. This is something I find personally really useful. If you play Supreme Commander, you can set a filter in your map list. For example, say, I want a list of maps, only 10 players and maybe vast.
That kind of stuff will be a lot easier to like tweak and add with Lua again with the sequel. And in fact, also another thing that I forgot to mention is also one of the things we usually get asked for Ashes is the fact that we don't have support for special characters. So Chinese and Russian. We can't do
UTF-8.
well. But with the current version of the engine we can do that. So like we have that for Star Control, and when we get around to doing the actual sequel, it will have like support for Russian and Chinese, etc.
One thing that you might not be aware of, I started playing the game with the German translation, and it's okay. It's not really good, it's not really bad, it's okay, but I believe this could be done better. This is something I really would like. And if there's any chance, maybe playing the campaign missions where you have at least 2 friendly factions, so your own an additional one, maybe playing them in co-op or something like that. That would be also cool. I
would love to do a co-op mode. I'm not sure if we will, but one thing which I do love is like, I think one of the best in the StarCraft 2 did was a co-op mode. And Red Alert 3, of course, had a really cool co-op mechanic. Like, co-op is really fun, and more RTS games should do it. So one thing which we were going to do, we didn't, again, resources, time, etc., was to do like multiplayer co-op for the scenarios. But yeah, in the future, I'm not sure if we will, but I would love to do more like co-op stuff for Ashes as well.
Yeah, well, I don't have any more on top of that, but still a lot, and ideas keep popping up.
Yeah, and I just will give the Noob Insight version of the sequel, I would say, better description. Maybe it's not the text for me, what is the problem? Maybe it's just the font or the presentation of the text, which was the problem during the multiplayer matches. Also, what I really would like is more information about the units. For example, if your constructor or your armory is building something, maybe have a pop-up window where you see the information how many resources this unit needs or this building needs at the moment.
Yeah, no way you're getting it. If you look at Supreme Commander, you see the actual resource drain and also the ETA. Something like that would be cool.
Yeah, the ETA would also be great, yeah. There is the info text, which tells you, of course, this unit needs 60 seconds, but it doesn't take into account if you help the building build the units with more constructors, for example. Another thing from Command & Conquer, special buildings or special units on the map. So for example, a tech building which gives you a better radar, or a unit who can cloak, something to mix up a little bit the matches. I know it's of course a little bit hard for the balancing, but this was always fun in Command & Conquer.
I also remember this from, I don't know if you know this old game, it's called Warlords. And the second part also has special items like giving you more income, speeding up a group, or giving a group more power, something like that. That would probably be cool if there was a way to kind of give power-ups on the map just beside of this usual improvement of economy part.
And we also love here, of course, mods and co-op modes. We need them, we want them, so give us them. Okay, Seven Saturn, you already told us your favorite moment, burning down your PC. But maybe, Schism, you have another favorite moment.
During the first tournament we ran, we had like a new player join for like, I won't get very far, like I'll just play. I'm up against one of our expert players, like one of the real like veterans. And it was a 1v1. It's going like, okay, this is kind of quiet, and then all of a sudden they just do a complete beeline rush for their Nexus, and they killed him. I still to this day don't know how they got away with that, but they did, and they didn't survive the rest of the tournament, of course. But it was very shocking. It's always fun when you see like a new player come in and surprise everyone with something that like, because one of the issues is that people get used to certain tactics, certain strategies, and then they stop thinking about new ways or like ways they can risk their opening builds and stuff to like get an upper hand. It was the cheesiest stuff I've ever seen in Ashes, and it worked, which was amazing. People underestimate how much you can cheese stuff in Ashes if you get your timing right and your enemy doesn't expect it.
Kind of when the first player did the first 6 pool in StarCraft.
Kinda, yeah. And of course, people saw that, and his old students like, "Oh, we'll look out for that now." I think, though, actually, no. I think my favorite, like one of my favorite times was when we released the, was it Secret Missions DLC, or was it No, it was the last one we did, where we added some units for the substrate, including the Phoenix. Heart of the Phoenix is an amazing juggernaut, which when it dies, it goes into an egg and respawns, because it's funny. But in that version, we really didn't properly balance the Phoenix. And so we were doing a stream for Steam sale. And we had our chief designer and one of the community managers, on like live stream, as well as some other players in the community playing live. And he built 3 Phoenixes. And because they have an ability which disables enemy turrets and structures, they got in close and they basically stun locked everything. And they wouldn't die, and it was a complete slaughter live on air, which no one thought was going to be quite so like, look at this game, look how well designed it is. You can screw over your opponent using just this one unit. You don't even bother the units, just use this one. It's expensive, but get enough of them, and your enemy can't do anything. It's fun. And I think one more would be, there's always the pizza map. You look at the pizza map, you have people think they're so funny, so they start spamming frigates and crashing tag game for everyone. No. Oh, there's one, I'm trying to think of it now, because there was, personal, not really a moment, but that's something which I find funny, is that when we introduced one of the juggernauts, the Eye of Darkness, which is a pretty big, powerful juggernaut with a weapon that can kill most anything within moments, is on the ground. Its big weakness is air units. I went to one of our designer and said like, hey, can I just name the main weapon here? Because I really want to name it. He said, yeah, sure, we will name it. I want to call it the Attitude Adjuster. And so today, if you build a queen and you look at what weapon it has, it is called the Attitude Adjuster. And it is possibly the single most powerful weapon in the game. I love it.
So we have to thank you for the specific one. I noticed this name too.
Because it adjusts attitudes.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there what are you going to call it? Like the Hyper Yamato Beam Cannon? No. Call it the Attitude Adjuster.
Okay, now I'm looking forward to see it.
As in opposition to the German word Meinungsverstärker, opinion enhancer.
Oh, that hurts. Okay, I would say this is the part of the video where we open the mic to you. Is there anything we left out or you missed in the discussion?
I don't think so. Honestly, I mean, I really like to say that artist games are special, and people should play more of them, because it is a niche genre, and I love the old games as anyone does. I love Supreme Commander, I love Command & Conquer, and etc. back in the day, but people need to see that folks want to buy and play the new games as well, and the more that do that, the more will get made. So this year, go and buy Iron Harvest and stuff if you haven't already, and even if you don't love it, these games need your support. They really do.
Yeah, I totally think also that way. I also support all the RTS games and space games.
Yeah, no, that's it though. Go and support your local war game.
Then thank you for joining us. It was a good insight into the development and future of the game. And yeah, I would really looking forward to talking with you again.
Right, it's been a pleasure.
Okay, that's it for this review. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the game, and of course, play the game. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.